Welcome to Family History Mysteries, a podcast that tells the stories uncovered through family history research, the unexpected stories of everyday people. I am an avid family historian who has been compiling my family tree for over 15 years, with nearly 20,000 people recorded in my trees. And please put a review on my podcast. That will certainly help in getting the word out there and creating more listenership. Episode 205, The Flower Family. I recently did a presentation for the Echuca Moama Family Historygroup, and I had a request to look into the story of Abraham Flower. Abraham Charles Flower, under an alias Richard Edwards, was tried in the Old Bailey Criminal Court in London on the 26th of October 1826 and was indicted with two other men, William Powell and John Harris, alias Walker, for stealing a graining comb 3.5 inches long, valued at 1 shilling 10 pence, and they were found guilty of grand larceny theft and transported for 7 years. Abraham's occupation at the time of his trial was a lighterman and labourer. Abraham had been born in Leominster, Herefordshire, the son of Abraham Flower, a wholesale jeweller in London, and Mary Crowe. Abraham married Susanna Matilda Pettit on the 6th of June 1825 at Lambeth, Surrey, when they were 19. On the convict hulk, Coromandel, with 300 aboard, he was transported to Bermuda. He was repeatedly put in irons for misbehaviour. His hulk report read that he was repeatedly ironed for periods and known to have had a knife in his hand on the day of the stabbing of W. Pickthorne and others, and a leader in all tussles with contemptuous and mutinous behaviour. He was listed as a clerk to the gang of penitentiary prisoners, was married with his wife living at Westminster. Their son Abraham was born on the 15th of November 1826, less than 3 weeks after his trial and conviction, while he was imprisoned in the hulks. Because of his truculence, he was sent to Van Diemen's Land on the Royal George, leaving on the 25th of June 1830. He arrived in Hobart on the 18th of October 1830 and was banished to the extremely harsh penal settlement on Sarah Island in Macquarie Harbour. Even there he was a troublemaker, but he was influenced by the resident Wesleyan minister, and he was one of 3 convicts converted to Quakerism by 2 visiting Quaker missionaries from London, James Backhouse and George Washington Walker. He settled down and was transferred to Hobart, where he was assigned as a servant to Government House, perhaps with Quaker assistance. He served his sentence of 7 years and received his freedom on the 26th of October 1833. Still under his alias as Richard Edwards, he applied for his wife, Susanna Matilda Flower, and son Abraham to come to Van Diemen's Land under the Convict Family Reunion Scheme at government expense. The scheme aimed to help readdress the gender imbalance in the colonies and provided an incentive to good behaviour amongst the male convicts. Matilda and young Abraham were among 49 passengers and 151 women convicts that arrived in Hobart on the 4th of September 1834 on the convict ship Edward. In the 1837 census, he and Susanna were in Newtown with 2 more children, and in the census of 1843 they were living in Murray Street, Hobart. He was in charge of a house with 5 others, all free and all listed as Quakers. By this stage they had 6 children. He had permission to attend Quaker meetings while still a convict in servitude at Government House in Hobart. He was again visited by Backhouse and Walker with a view to formal membership of the movement, called the Religious Society of Friends, and this was approved on the 14th of October 1833. So still a convict, he became a member of the newly established Hobart Monthly Meeting. 5 others with convict experience also became members. Backhouse and Walker had to combat a certain amount of prejudice amongst some friends who resented the acceptance of convicts into the meeting. Abraham was a very active member and minister and was recognised as his gift for speaking acceptably in meetings for worship. He was an acting clerk and he remained closely associated with Backhouse and Walker, who regarded him to be a prop to the struggling Hobart meeting during their periods of absence. Interestingly, in view of his later monetary problems, he and another friend were appointed in 1838 to advise Friends of Hobart Town to keep proper accounts. On the 5th of October 1838, in the Tasmanian, a Hobart Town newspaper, Abraham Flower wrote to the paper from the old orphan school in Newtown. On the 20th of April 1841, in the Hobart Courier, in the matter of the insolvency of Abraham Charles Flowers of Newtown in the island of Van Diemen's Land, Yeoman,
To the several creditors of the above-named insolvent or their agents, notice is hereby given that Abraham Charles Flowers did this day present to William Sorrell Esquire, Commissioner of Insolvent Estates for Hobart Town, a petition, praying among other things that he might be declared insolvent, and Thomas James Crouch of Hobart Town Esquire be the provisional assignee of his estate and effects. On the 5th day of May, at the Courthouse, Hobart Town, at 10 o'clock for a meeting of creditors of the insolvent in order to prove their debts and the election of a permanent assignee, the examination of the insolvent, and otherwise proceeding the said insolvency. And 10 days later in the Tasmanian Weekly Dispatch of Hobart Town, Working Bullocks, Cows, Calves by Mr. James Duncan. On Monday the 3rd of May, on the premises of Mr. Abraham Flowers at Newtown, 6 working bullocks, a bullock cart, dairy cows, calves, farming implements, household furniture and a variety of sundries, the whole stock which will be sold without reserve. Cash terms. And a couple of weeks later, on the 11th of May 1841, in the Hobart Town Advertiser, in the matter of the insolvency of Abraham Charles Flowers of Newtown in the island of Van Diemen's Land, farmer, the above-named Abraham Charles Flowers having submitted to be examined relative to his solvency on this day, will apply for his discharge in pursuant of provisions of the Act. On the 26th of May at the Courthouse in Hobart Town for hearing of such application. So it seems that even though he's declared insolvency, once selling his goods, it seems to have cleared his debt and he's asking for a cancellation of that insolvency. A month later, on the 18th of June 1841 in the Hobart Courier, the estate and premises and the occupation of Abraham Flowers on the opposite side of the creek, the serpentine road through the whole of the property affords ready access to every part, presenting at every turn the most delightful sights imaginable for the erection of country villas and the formation of gardens and pleasure grounds. Terms at sale. And on the 5th of November 1841 in the Hobart Town Advertiser, milch cows for sale. 2 excellent young milch cows, Poland breed, in full milk, having lately calved, inquire to Abraham C. Flower of Newtown where they may be seen. And about 18 months later, on the 21st of March 1843 in the Hobart Colonial Times, Civil Supreme Court, Bainton versus Flowers. This action was brought to recover the sum of £50 lent by the plaintiff to Mr. A.C. Flowers by an agreement to which Mr. Crouch was a party. Mr. Stewart stated to the effect that the plaintiff, Mr. James Bainton of Browns River, some time ago advanced to Mr. Abraham Charles Flowers the sum of £50 at 12.5% interest, to which Mr. Crouch was a party, the money to be repaid by 3 months' notice given in writing. Mr. McMinn proved the admission of Mr. Flowers to the receipt of the notice in terms of the agreement more than 12 months before the 17th of December last, on the day in which he signed the admission in Mr. McMinn's office. On his cross-examination, Mr. McMinn stated that Mr. Flowers had been requested to sign the admission because he was going to Sydney. At that time, an action had been commenced against him solely, which was discontinued by the advice of counsel. The Solicitor General submitted that there was no proof that the notice to repay the money had been given in writing, and unless this was proved, no evidence of the admission could be received. The learned counsel also contended that Mr. Crouch, having received no consideration, must be considered only in light of a security. These points were overruled. His Honour, in directing the jury, told them that if they were satisfied that the defendants received notice in terms of the agreement, the plaintiff would be entitled to a verdict for the £50 with interest from the date of the notice of repayment. A portion of the interest, £10 having been paid, the jury found a verdict for the plaintiff, £64, 1 shilling and 3 pence. And a few days later, in the Hobart Courier, the undermentioned individuals have been duly licensed as hawkers and carriers in accordance with the Hawkers and Carriers Act. And Abraham Flower is listed as being licensed in Hobart, in effect on the 21st of March 1843. Abraham tried various jobs. He was a butcher, a milkman and a farmer, and despite £300 being left to him by his father, he did become insolvent in 1841. This led to a prolonged investigation by the Hobart Quaker Monthly Meeting, and in 1844, after he and his family had moved to Launceston, he was to be visited as to the conduct of the said friend and as to his clearness with respect to his pecuniary circumstances. There were more problems in Launceston, and finally a certificate of removal was prepared and upheld by the Van Diemen's Land Quaker Yearly Meeting on the 3rd day of April 1845. The Launceston meeting had minuted his failing in a business venture, which was exporting fruit to Port Phillip, slowness in clearing his debts, and involving himself with a secret society, the Order of Rechabites. This society was founded in 1835 with a commitment to teetotalism. In March 1847, the meeting ruled that the Rechabites, like the Freemasons, fall under the definition of secret societies, that the adoption of badges, insignia, passwords and signs were inconsistent with Christian simplicity and gravity, that time spent in meetings was misspent time, and that coffee houses where the meetings were frequently held were public houses. When Abraham persisted in his Rechabite connection, the Quakers formally disowned him. A letter to him from George Washington Walker in Hobart in 1847 regretted his association in Launceston with the Rechabite tent, but agreed with him being disowned by the Launceston Monthly Meeting of Quakers and ceasing to be a member of our religious society, while admitting that many times has my own soul been refreshed in contemplating thy Christian deportment, and in feeling the influence of thy fervent and lively exercise on behalf of others, which was, I have no doubt, blessed to the edification of many as well as myself. He pleaded with him to consider rather whether in the sight of the Lord thou art not verily guilty of having departed in heart from him, of having left thy first love, to repent and long for him to be restored to the full measure of his favour, and to be reinstated in membership with us, and be restored to full unity with thy friends, who be assured cherish still a warm interest in thy welfare. Signed, I remain thy sincere friend, George W. Walker. Elsewhere, Walker expressed his verdict as, I still believe that lies at the door of those who shut up the bowels of compassion against an erring brother. And on the 8th of May 1847, in the Launceston Examiner, Abraham Flower wrote to the paper in an advertisement, to W. L. Goodwin, editor of the Cornwall Chronicle, perceiving in your paper of the first instant 2 queries, which are too obvious to be mistaken as having reference to myself, in reply to the first, is it true that the person who spoke in the meeting and admitted that he had been a prisoner has been 4 times convicted? In answer to this, I beg leave to state that this is utterly false, and that I never was but once in my life put upon trial for any offence whatsoever against the laws of my country, which occurrence took place upwards of 20 years ago, but before I was 21 years of age. It is a misfortune for this town that persons have a stake in the affairs of this colony, and who differ in opinion with yourself, cannot with safety come forward to express those opinions without the fear of being anonymously slandered and held up to scorn and ridicule in your paper. Unlike your correspondent, I subscribe my name, Abraham Flower, Launceston, 4th of May 1847. And 11 months later, on the 26th of April 1848, in the Launceston Cornwall Chronicle, passengers per Raven for Port Phillip, and Abraham Flower is listed as part of this move to Victoria. On the 17th of May 1848, in the Port Phillip Patriot and Morning Advertiser, it stated that clearing out was Abraham Flower on the day before, on the 16th of May, in steerage to Launceston. And then on the 9th of February 1849, in the Melbourne Argus, the Swan, bringing Abraham Flower back to Victoria. So it seemed that he went back and forth for a little while, and at this time Abraham arrived at the goldfields near Castlemaine. On the 30th of May 1849, so only a couple of months after it was announced that he was in Victoria, in the Cornwall Chronicle in Launceston, in the matter of the insolvency of Abraham Charles Flower of Launceston in the island of Van Diemen's Land, Fruiterer. To the several creditors of the above-named insolvent or their agents, notice is hereby given that the said Abraham James Flower did this day present my petition with schedules attached to William Gardner, Sams, Esquire, Commissioner of Insolvent Estates for Launceston, alleging my insolvency and praying for relief pursuant to the revisions of the Act of Council on the island. I was this day declared insolvent accordingly, and Michael Kennedy of Launceston, Esquire, was appointed provisional assignee of my estate and effects. And notice is hereby given that the Commissioner appointed on the 6th day of June at the courthouse in Launceston for time and place for the first meeting of my creditors to prove my debts and an election of a permanent assignee in a matter proceeding of my insolvency. And that was dated the 20th of May 1849. by Abraham Charles Flower, insolvent in person. So on the 9th of June 1849 in the Launceston Examiner, it announces that Abraham Flowers was in the insolvent court. His debts were proved, £65 to W.M. Dean and £10 to W.B. Kingswell. The furniture was ordered to be sold, and M. Kennedy Esquire elected permanent assignee, and the second meeting and on discharge was set for the 20th of June. In March 1849, there was still another letter by one of the Quakers to my dear friend Abraham Charles Flower, with fervent desires for thy welfare, that thou mayst lay aside every weight and the sin which may easily beset thee, yield thyself unreservedly to his will, cost what it may, lest thou should fail in receiving the end of thy faith, even the salvation of thy soul. And again in March 1850, to dear Abraham, having seen a letter from William Horton that has filled my mind with sorrow on thy account and for thy family, regarding his utter destitution, and urging him, instead of waiting till means may drop into his hands, to enable him to obtain journey man's wages, if it be had, and earn at any rate food and raiments in the meantime, rather than starve in idleness. He enclosed £1, which is equal to around $200 in today's money, which, with what I know others are sending, will temporarily assist. He referred to other letters he sent to him when thou wast in Melbourne. On the 12th of May 1851 in Tasmania, their eldest son Abraham died, aged only 24. By 1858, Susanna and the children had joined Abraham, but Susanna died on the 1st of June 1858 at Butcher's Gully near Fry's Creek in Victoria, aged 52. Their youngest child was only 11. In 1868, at the age of 63, two travelling Quaker ministers, Joseph Neves and Walter Robson, discovered Abraham near Castlemaine, and Walter gave the following picture of the old man. His wife being deceased and his family married and settled elsewhere, he lives alone, his occupation gold digger, which brings him in an income of about 5 shillings per week, which is around about $30 a week today. He is in a most happy and thoughtful state, telling us his wants were well supplied. His little 2-roomed hut of his own building enabled him to live rent-free. He keeps some goats which supply him with milk. We had a very precious time with him. A few months ago he was put in jail for a little debt which he had offered payment of, but his creditor, an unprincipled man who had since been sold off and ruined himself, refused to accept the money when offered, and from spite, we suppose, put the old man in jail. Even here he was happy, and it was very instructive to us both to see how humble and tender and sensible of his many shortcomings he was, yet so full of love of Jesus and gratitude to him. And there was nothing of unkind feelings towards those who had been instrumental in his separation from his Quaker friends. Now, interestingly, on the 11th of September 1873 in the Launceston Examiner, it discusses tanner licences that had been issued by William Phillips of Georgetown, and Abraham Charles Flower of Launceston was listed as one of those that obtained a licence. So I'm not sure whether Abraham returned to Tasmania for a short time. However, Abraham, listed as a carpenter, died in Echuca in Victoria in December 1895 at the age of 90, and he was buried in the nearby Moama Cemetery. Abraham and Susanna's children. As mentioned, the firstborn Abraham died young in Tasmania. The second child, Sarah Flower, was born on the 24th of September 1835 in Hobart. She married James Bryson Thompson, who was Scottish, in Fry's Creek, Victoria, on the 2nd of July 1853, when she was 17 and James 25. Abraham and Susanna were the witnesses to this marriage, and James's occupation was listed as a marksman at the time of their marriage. They had 2 children, William Bryson Thompson in June 1855 in Maryborough, Victoria, and Mary Ann Thompson in 1859 at Vaughan, near Castlemaine. James Thompson had a few aliases. He was also known as James Wilson, George Craig, or James McIntyre, and he was convicted of horse stealing on the 18th of February 1856, and he was sentenced to 6 years jail on the roads. He was released on the 18th of October 1858 for good conduct, but he was then sentenced to 6 months hard labour on the 30th of April 1859 for vagrancy at Maryborough, and then for larceny on the 25th of October 1859 at Kilmore, and for cattle stealing at Castlemaine on the 20th of February 1860, which he received a total of 8 years jail. He was discharged in November 1867. His jail notes state that in 1856 he came out from Scotland on the Duchess of Northumberland in 1843 as a convict with a term of 7 years to Van Diemen's Land. He'd been charged with theft and he'd had 2 previous convictions. He was a weaver in Scotland and was only 17 when he was convicted on the 4th of May 1842. His jail record also stated that he had a wife and child, which were living with her parents at Fryers Creek, and that he had a brother at the Simpsons diggings, and that James Bryson was his proper name. There were letters sent to his wife from the jail, care of his father-in-law, systematically every 3 months from March 1856 to April 1860. On the 14th of February 1890, in the Gippsland Farmers Journal and Traralgon, Hayfield and Rosedale News, there is an advertisement. Notice is hereby given that the partnership hereafter subsisting between James Bryson Thompson and George Rayner, carrying on business in co-partnership at Traralgon in the colony of Victoria as coach builders, blacksmiths and wheelwrights, under the style or firm of Thompson and Rayner, had this day been dissolved by mutual consent. All accounts owing to the late firm will be received and paid by the said James Bryson Thompson, who will henceforth carry on the said business. So it seems that James Thompson got on his feet after his lengthy last jail sentence. Now, it's quite clear that James Thompson and Sarah did not remain together, as Sarah commenced a relationship with James Thomas Lee, an Englishman in Terilta, which is now known as Kangaroo Flat, near Bendigo, in 1862. So while her husband was in jail, she commenced a relationship with James Lee. She was 27 and James 31. James had arrived in Melbourne in October 1856 and he was an engine driver on the mines. They went on to have 12 children together. And Sarah died on the 29th of June 1910 in Morwell, Victoria. The third child was Mary Susan Flower. She was born on the 25th of May 1837 in Hobart. She married James Dunphy in Victoria in 1855 when she was 18 in Castlemaine. And there's a reference to James Dunphy on the 22nd of September 1855, so the year that they were married, in the Melbourne Age. A warrant has been granted for the Maryborough bench for the arrest of James Dunphy, late of Elmer Slaughterman, for feloniously taking away and selling to one John Costello a red cow and bull, the property of Mr. Hector Norman Simpson. Dunphy is 6 foot high, 25 years of age, dark complexion, small eyes, a long prominent nose, dark brown hair, black whiskers meeting under the chin, a native of Ireland, and has been married to a woman who now resides in Maryborough. He's well known as the owner of Dunphy's Yard at Elmer, and it's supposed he has gone to Fiery Creek. From thence he purposes to leave the colony. And this is the last I could find out about Mary Susan Flower. The fourth child was Charles Flower, who was born on the 20th of June 1841 in Hobart. He married Susan Elizabeth Hill in Victoria in 1870, when Charles was 29 and Susan 18. They had 8 children together and they lived in the Vaughan and Chiltern areas before moving to Echuca in around 1885. And he died on the 14th of November 1886 in Moama, New South Wales, aged only 45. The next child was James Flower, who was born on the 30th of April 1843 in Hobart. He married Sarah Hill in Victoria on the 14th of May 1866. They had 15 children together and they lived in Vaughan, Terilta, later Kangaroo Flat, and then moved to the Echuca Moama area by 1880. And James died on the 3rd of April 1918 in Geelong West at the age of 74. And there's an amazing photo of James Flower's funeral in Geelong in 1918 with the carriage and the mourners, which I'll add to my Facebook page. Their firstborn, James, had a son, Harold James Flower. He had married Alice Harris, and their son, Francis James Flower, known as Jimmy, listed his birth date on his enlistment papers as the 29th of March 1920 in Echuca, that is 20 and a half years old. But he was actually born 1 year later, making him 19 and a half. He enlisted in World War II at Albury on the 27th of February 1940. His father was listed as his next of kin and was listed at residing at Culcairn in New South Wales, and Francis was living at Albury West at the time of his enlistment and working as a printer. He embarked from Australia on the 30th of July 1941 and disembarked in Singapore, and then he headed to Malaya. His mother was only allowed to write 25 words once a month, as well as being able to send him comforts from home, mainly cigarettes and socks. Alice wrote this letter to her son every month for 5 years. She sent it to the Red Cross in the hope that the letters would be forwarded to him, even after they received a letter saying that he was reported missing on the 2nd of February 1942. At the end of 1945, the family drove all the way to Albury to meet the train that contained returned soldiers that had been prisoners of war. Men from the train told the family that their son had been killed before the fall of Singapore, that is, several years before. And the sixth child, Susanna Jane Flower, was born on the 22nd of October 1846 in Launceston. She married William Jinks in Castlemaine, Victoria, at the Wesleyan Parsonage on the 2nd of April 1866. They had 7 children together. They lived in Vaughan and then moved to Moama, New South Wales by 1877. By 1913, Susanna was living in Prahran, Victoria, and she died on the 20th of August 1925 in Williamstown at the age of 78. And there are descendants of the Flower family that are still residents of Echuca Moama.
If you are interested in sharing your story on my podcast, Family History Mysteries, please go to my Facebook page and send me a message. If you would like some assistance in filling in the gaps in your family tree to see what mysteries you solve, please get in touch. And don't forget, you can have early access to episodes by subscribing, and you'll also gain access to bonus episodes.